Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here with what I hope will be a fun video, and that is discussing my favorite and least favorite tropes when it comes to horror. Now, as a reader, this is mostly going to be focused on books, but in some of these cases, these concepts will apply to television and movies as well. And of course, in the comments, I want to get all of your feedback, so please let me know if you agree or disagree or have your own tropes that you love or hate. I want to hear it all. If you're new to my channel, I do read a lot of horror, and normally I'm giving a lot of recommendations, but today I'm going to do a more discussion-like video, so definitely do consider subscribing and sticking around. Otherwise, let's get into it. So let's start with this video by talking about my least favorite tropes, and the first one I want to talk about is dream sequences. Now specifically what I mean by that is a situation where you start a new chapter or maybe the very beginning of the book and you see the character, they are going along, and then something absolutely terrifying starts to happen to them. Maybe a monster jumps out, something is grabbing at their legs, and the scene becomes absolutely terrifying and you're like, oh my gosh, how is this happening already? We're so early into the book. And then you find out that the character was just asleep, it was all a dream, they wake up and they are just plain fine. I cannot stand this trope. I feel like authors do this in order to kind of flex their scary muscles and be like, ooh, I'm writing a horror book, it might be scary, look what I can write, isn't this horrifying? But as soon as you know it's a dream, it takes all of the energy and excitement out of it, and it just feels like a really cheap trick because again, nothing's happening, it's all fake, and it's just like teasing the audience or the reader, and I just cannot stand it. And it's just something that bugs me every single time it happens, and unfortunately I've definitely found books that will do that over and over again, and it drives me absolutely nuts. So please, if it bothers you as well, let me know. And then it's a whole other thing when you find out at the end of a book that the entire book was a dream. That is like a whole new level of terrible. But for this video, I'm going to just focus on tropes in general. So yeah, let me know how you feel about dream sequences. Next, let's talk about technology in horror, specifically the fact that technology in horror never seems to work. This is something I gripe about all the time on my channel because it bugs me a lot. And that's the fact that for whatever reason, in every single horror book, everyone forgets to charge their phone, everyone forgets their phone at home, everyone doesn't have a charger on them, and even if they do have their charger, well, the electricity is out. And of course, the landline isn't working either, and the computer isn't working, and so forth. It drives me absolutely nuts. So any book that is set in the modern day and they establish when it is written and then the technology just stops working, it frustrates me a lot. I do know the reason for that is the argument that modern technology in general creates a lot of plot holes in books and stories. The fact is that so many times with like miscommunication and being cut off or isolated, it just doesn't really work or isn't as scary if everyone is able to call each other and text and let each other know that they're okay, etc. But it's just frustrating because I feel like authors lean on it so much and it just gets overdone, and I really get bugged by it. I will actually give a lot more respect to authors that will just simply set their books back a few decades to at least avoid the issue of cell phones and kind of have technology only work to a certain point because it hasn't advanced as much. I would rather them do that than just simply have everything stop working magically. And I get that there's a storm and they have reasons, but I roll my eyes every single time it happens. I do see it not only in books, but of course in television, movies. I think that shows up a lot. And yeah, I just feel like it's really cheap writing, in my opinion. And the next horror trope that really bugs me is when the horror of the story comes from the threat or the possible actual happening of violence against characters, particularly usually against the female characters in the story. Now, I will admit that I can read some really disturbing stories, and I have read and enjoyed, I will acknowledge it, stories that have used this trope. But the more I read it and the more I read horror in general, the less I like it because, again, I feel like it's a really cheap way to scare me because, again, it is a really terrifying experience to anyone in a vulnerable body or in any vulnerable state. That is just horrifying and despicable, and it's an easy way to make a villain just absolutely dark and evil and just make you hate them. But because I've read so much horror, I have read so many stories that have found smarter ways to scare me, that have gone into psychological horror and other avenues and gotten around that. So when I see it, I'm just disappointed because I know that they are capable of doing better and can find other ways to do it that are new and fresh. And it's just something that has been done over and over again in both fiction and film. Again, I know that these stories exist because I've seen so many fantastic authors write these scary stories using other tropes and narrative devices, but when you just go straight to the threat of sexual violence and rape and abuse, it just gets a little bit tiring. And again, I've read and enjoyed books that have used this trope, but I do not love those books because of that trope, if that makes sense. And finally, for tropes that I absolutely hate is just a really generic one, and that is characters being stupid. Now, there is something kind of fun about a character that is just plain dumb, but when you establish characters as being pretty normal, regular people of supposedly reasonable intelligence, and then you have them do really stupid things, it is frustrating. It's the fact that you have the group of friends, and then they all decide to separate. Again, they're like, oh, I'll just leave my cell phone on the table while I go and explore this scary thing, and they hear a noise and they go and investigate and don't even take like any kind of weapon or this or that, like all the dumb things that, especially I think in movies, you know, they have us yelling at the TV screen saying, why are you doing that? You're so dumb, don't go in the basement. And I will acknowledge again that it's kind of a narrative device, it's a trope for a reason, but I don't love it. I really enjoy when the characters are smart. I identify so much more with them because I would like to think that I would be one of those really intelligent people in those situations that would be a little bit street smart and savvy. Probably not, let's be honest. I would be killed off in the first 5 minutes of the horror movie. I know myself, but I still want to relate to the smart characters and pretend that I would be more like them. And so because of that fact, I find stupid characters doing stupid things really frustrating, or more so, I find characters that are not supposed to be stupid doing stupid things the most frustrating. Hopefully that makes a lick of sense. Now, switching gears, let's talk about some horror tropes that I do love. And surprisingly, this list is actually longer than my negatives, which I did not expect. But there's a lot I love about horror, which is probably why I read the genre so much. So the first one I want to talk about is unreliable narrators. And what I mean by that is narrators where you are establishing the fact that you can't completely trust them. Whether or not they are actually truly unreliable, they at least have the possibility to be. And so what I mean by that, it can go in different directions, but perhaps a character where you know that they are drinking, they're an alcoholic, so you're getting the story from their perspective and it might be skewed. Possibly they have some different illness like dementia something, or they're getting blackouts in their memory, and there's some reason that we're just missing parts of the story, or we can't trust that they are giving us all the pieces of the puzzle. I love that when it is done well. It is something I love not only in horror, but also you see it a lot more in thrillers. And again, when they kind of cross over, I am so happy with that. So it's definitely a trope that is done again and again, but I think if it's well established, for me, it just creates that possibility that, you know, maybe something isn't actually happening, or again, we're not fully understanding what is happening, and it makes for some really good twists and reveals and surprises along the way, which is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a fun story, something that will just surprise me with something maybe I haven't seen before. So I think it's a really good avenue to get to some really good places, and it's just a matter of what the author chooses to do with that unreliability and what they're building towards in doing so. And then along the same lines, I want to add in the trope of mental illness, or the possibility of mental illness. Now, this one could easily end up on my worst tropes list because if it's done poorly, it is really, really terrible. But if it is done well, it's something I really like. And what I mean by that is, again, going back to the question of reliability, it's the idea of, is this person going crazy, or is something supernatural actually going on? And if you follow my channel and watch a lot of my book reviews, you'll know that that is the plot synopsis I give all the time, and I never get tired of it. Because for me, often that means that the story has an element of psychological horror, because again, so much is being played out in the character's mind. Often we're getting the story from a very close perspective, so we only get to see what they see, and we don't know if we can trust them. And so again, I really like this trope if it's done well. Again, whenever you're dealing with possible mental illness, I understand that representation can be rough enough in certain places, but if it's well plotted, if it's put into the story and it just leaves that possibility, I love that, because I love when stories, especially with horror, is very ambiguous and up for interpretation. That is something I enjoy, because after I finish a story, I will spend time thinking about it again, and I love discussing it with friends. I do so many buddy reads, and because of that, I get to discuss and say, well, did this actually happen? Maybe they interpreted it this way. Was it all a dream, but not a dream? Because that when it goes into dream sequences, can't stand it. But for whatever reason, if the person is just crazy, I'm open to it to a degree. I'm open to the possibility of that being the ending, but I don't actually like when that is the ending, which is a whole nother video. Anyway, moving right along. Next, a horror trope that I love is what I would describe as meta or self-aware horror. And that is when the author of a horror story is very much aware of all of the other tropes of the horror genre and make their characters also very aware of that, and then the story narrative is all built around that. So this can go in a couple different directions. It can be a character that is obsessed with horror movies and is constantly referencing Stephen King books, things like that. I love those nods and winks, but I like when it's taken even further and the characters will reference again specifically the tropes, and they will call out things like the final girl, or they'll acknowledge the fact that, like, hey, isn't it weird that, like, my cell phone is dead, just like in all these horror movies, you know, how weird is that? I enjoy when authors recognize and will call out when they're actually taking advantage of these tropes, and it makes me hate those tropes less when the author puts up their hand and acknowledges that they're doing that. And I've seen it done very well, because unsurprisingly, a lot of the authors that I love that write horror are also huge fans of the genre themselves, so they will make references to, again, the classics of both film and books, and you get to see their love of the genre written into the stories. And so I really enjoy that. It rarely disappoints me, and I just think it's so much fun when I see it in a story. And maybe this is a little bit of a cheat to put in, because I don't know if this is really a trope, because I don't see it super often, but when I do, I love it. It's kind of the opposite of one of my worst tropes that I listed before, and that is ultra-modern horror. So what I love is when a horror story is set in the present day, and instead of having all the technology break down and everyone's cell phone dies, the author leans into the very contemporary setting and uses technology as part of the story. So that can be a place where perhaps the cell phone is being possessed, or someone is getting creepy text messages coming through their phone or their email, and they're getting like pictures through Snapchat and Instagram. I adore when that happens. It is just so unsettling, so unique, and I think it's just really smart. And I think I like it so much because I hate the opposite of this trope to such a degree that I appreciate authors that fight against it and say, yes, horror can still be scary when technology exists, because I've heard that's the argument that they say that once everyone has a cell phone, there's no way to make a story horrifying. And these authors prove that that is not the case. I've read some absolutely terrifying stories where cell phones are working and it just makes everything so much worse. So I personally get very excited when authors write stories right in the modern day, acknowledge that everyone has so much access to technology, and flips that on its head and makes it a worst possible scenario. I love it. It is so much fun, and easily some of my all-time favorite horror stories fall under that category. Then another trope I absolutely love is these stories where the people are actually even worse than the supernatural beings in the story. So what I mean by that is you will have a story set in a small town, for example, and there will be some kind of supernatural creature that is haunting it or attacking it, etc. But as the story progresses, you learn or realize that the actual human beings are in a lot of ways so much worse than whatever monster may or may not exist. And I love stories that lean into realistic horror and are really a commentary on social issues and just focus on racial and just different aspects of their society that are so despicable, and really call out people for their disgusting behavior. These books can be really tough to read, and of course they can tie into, again, that like sexual violence, things like that. But when it's done in a way to make commentary on people and society and all of that, I like that. I think it is very well done. I really appreciate those stories. I do think that those stories work best on someone like myself who reads so much of the genre that I kind of like stories where it's like it's not really about the horror of the monster. And I think I appreciate that so much more having read so many stories where simply it is all about the monster, and so it just kind of takes it up another level. And I think that when I do see it done and done well, I absolutely love it. Another trope I cannot get enough of, even though it is such a cliche, and that is the breakdown of the friend or family group in the middle of the horror crisis. These stories are typically tied in with survival horror, and I eat them up all the time. So you have a group of people that might be best friends, and often they're best friends or friends that used to be very close, and then they had already some kind of breakdown prior to the event, but for some reason they're getting together, trying to make amends, and they're trying to get along, and then something horrible happens, and it just puts that strain on their relationship that pushes it to the breaking point. I don't know why, but I love this so much. Maybe because families are dysfunctional, friend groups are dysfunctional too, but there's something about watching other people's lives break down that just make me appreciate and enjoy my own relationships and life so much more. So I don't know, it's cliche. I've seen it done 1,000 times. It really isn't new, and I've never seen a way that it's like surprised me at this point, but I will read it over and over again because I just find it so satisfying to read, and I don't know what that says about me, but I really enjoy that breakdown of the relationship. And I'm going to end by talking about two tropes that sometimes are separate and sometimes they tie in together. So I absolutely love the trope surrounding the desperation of parents and what they will do to save their children. And I also love stories surrounding the desperation surrounding grief. So if someone has lost someone who may be a child, what they're willing to do to get them back or to try to do so. And often enough, as you would expect in stories, these can kind of cross over and come together. And I love them so much. I think that grief is just such a powerful motivator, and the same thing with being a parent. You get that primal feeling of protection and just willing to do anything, put yourself in harm's way in order to protect that little one. I think that it just creates really good character motivation and makes for some very believable plot devices, because you often need characters to go and do something that is outside of their comfort zone and to do something that is dangerous or would otherwise be perceived as stupid, as I mentioned earlier. But it doesn't feel stupid when you know that they're doing it because they are so desperate to save that person, to bring them back. And again, especially as a parent now, I find those stories very relatable on the parent side. And then I think anyone can put themselves in the shoes of someone grieving, whether or not you've personally experienced that close in your own life. We can all imagine what that would be like. And again, I think it's something that really allows us to get attached to characters, to care deeply for them, to sympathize, to empathize with them. And then if something terrible happens, we feel even worse. And I do think that there's just this wonderful marriage in horror between these horrifying emotions and also the emotions of grief and sorrow. And for whatever reason, they just, again, tie in so well together. I love stories that deal and address these themes, and rarely do they disappoint me. I love them so much. So that's it for this video here, but before you go, I would love for you to drop a comment letting me know your least favorite and favorite horror tropes. If you agree or disagree with me, that is totally okay. And I realize, unlike most of my videos, I'm not providing any specific book recommendations here, but if you do have books that utilize some of my favorite tropes, I would love to hear your recommendations down below. I would definitely check them out if I haven't already. Hopefully you enjoyed this for a little bit of a change in pace on my channel. And if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror as well as science fiction, fantasy, and thrillers. You can help me out by sharing this video around online, giving it a thumbs up, dropping a comment, even if it's just a little emoji, and you can hit that little notification bell so you never miss another video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.